probably wondering why we're not allowing you to listen to the music. Don't worry. Go look for it yourself.
Why are you being so mean?
I'm a man.
Go look for it yourself.
Okay, when I go find out. Is that better?
Oh dear.
That's the same way we are looking for solutions for our economy and hoping that, you know, the elections right ahead of us in February will help us make decisions that will put us in the right path. But what are those issues that will be making the rounds, especially in terms of economy? Well, recently, the 2023 Macroeconomic Outlook Report titled Nigeria in Transition, Recipes for Shared Property was released by the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, which addressed some of these, you know, pertinent questions. Because, I mean, hey, 2022 gave us what? A whole load of challenges, and not just Nigeria, but across the globe. Now,
it looks like the challenges are continuing in 2023.
Well, to reverse, you know, it's so much easier to pull down a building than to build.
Oh, definitely.
How long
you can pull down a building in a day, but you can't build a house in a day.
Come the holy on. How long did it take to bring down the Twin Towers?
Oh, minutes.
So a day?
Minutes.
Come on. So, and the same goes for an economy. I mean, look at what COVID-19 did to us, you know, in that same 2020, and the momentum it gathered then hadn't really, you know, lowered. But, of course, that sustained growth was lower than expected and led by the non-oil sector in Nigeria, while the oil sector remained in contraction, despite elevated global oil prices, among several other things. In all of this economic speak, my favorite topic is usually the micro, small, and medium enterprises that takes care of a huge chunk of unemployment challenges in any economy all over the world. But you know what? What do I know? I'm not an economist, but we have two gentlemen here with us this morning to talk us through some of the issues that line up for us in the year 2023. Dr. Olusegun Mishakin is Head of Research and Chief Economist at Nigeria Economic Summit Group. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
As well as Taslim Shitabe, who is the Chief Economist and Managing Editor, ProShare Nigeria Limited. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's begin with you. Your organization put out that report. Perhaps it's good to even begin by asking, what are the objectives of that report?
Yeah, like you said now, we've been in this situation since even before 2020, before the COVID pandemic. And it's not just about Nigeria, it's a global issue. And so if you track the impact of, let's say from 2020, you track the impact of COVID-19 and some other macro shocks globally on the state of the economy of Nigeria, you are likely going to observe two striking issues. Number one, that globally, nationally, in the case of Nigeria now, our productive capacity has been weakening. In other words, we are not doing fine. We are not, sectors are not producing well. Government finances is weak. So on that surface, you will notice that the economy is not doing fine. Pretty good. The second, which is the most important, is that the income inequality gap between the house and the house-nots also is becoming more obvious. So during the pandemic, as against the normal instinct, where you would think, oh, everybody is not doing fine, everybody is doing badly, we actually notice that on the global scale, some people are doing better. The house are doing far, far, far better during that period. And the have-nots are the one that are going about no job, unemployment increasing. So it's enough for us. We've seen the evidence. We should move the debate from mere advocating for growth, which is just being measured by GDP. We should move away from that into questioning which type of growth, for who. And that's why we name it Nigeria in transition. Obviously, Nigeria is in transition. What are the recipes? What are the reforms that we need to make sure we achieve shared prosperity. So shared prosperity is the prosperity that is built. How do we make sure that it's being shared in a fair manner? So it is a lot of considering both the efficiency and then the welfare consideration on the average Nigerian.
You know, Mr. Shitabe, there are those who would say, as Dr. Mishakin said, we're not just getting into this. In fact, one of the things that I usually say is, anytime I hear that we are in recession, I say that we have always been on the touchline of recession because we are not growing at the pace we should be growing. Population growth is way much higher than economic growth. So naturally, it's like we're on the touchline. We've been on tethers all the while. So is it any surprise then that these issues that the NESG has brought up has come up?
My first response would be to thank the NESG for the report. Dr. Omishaki and his team have done a brilliant job in reviewing the economy, creating opportunities for us to assess what he called in their report enablers of the economy, and then do a forecast for 2023. Now, to come to your question, should we be surprised about the difficulties pointed out? No. We won't definitely be surprised. You alluded to something, our GDP growth rate. I'm not a particular lover of GDP. I think other measures should be used to assess development.
If I can pause you on that. You're not the first economist to say that.
Yeah.
Yet you guys keep measuring growth with the GDP.
A bit of laziness and intellectual arrogance. but you know, really, we do use the GDP. So yes, for this conversation, continue with that GDP. And you talked about the population. So you're talking about GDP per individual. And that's an important metric. You know, how much does the average Nigerian generate? Now, the GDP has slowed a bit. It was negative in 2020, obviously for COVID-19, minus 1.9%. But there was a quick rebound. And so we saw the GDP go up to 3.4% in 2021, right? So 2022, what are we expecting? 3%. Now, 3% is roughly the same growth rate of your population. So what it means is that basically you're stagnant. Yes, the numbers seem to go higher, but per capita, per individual, you're really not growing. And to make matters worse, adjust that for dollars. You know, I mean, adjust all the national output in terms of dollars. GDP, real GDP per dollar is what we're looking at. But adjust, rather than look at GDP, for instance, why don't we look at a matrix that takes more than just those numbers, and we measure other things, maybe, for instance, gross product, gross national product, which is a different metric from the gross domestic product. Let me tell you why. There are a lot of Nigerians abroad. They're generating earnings, and those repatriations come into Nigeria. And prior to the COVID-19 era, that was about $22 billion coming into the Nigerian economy, between $20 and $22 billion. COVID made it dip a bit. So what happens to all that money that's outside there and comes into the Nigerian economy? And I like, before we came on set, you were talking about The Voice, Nigeria. And what came to my mind immediately was that we have the Burna Boys of this world. We have the Davidos. We have the Wizkids. We have this, and they're generating money outside Nigeria, right? Most of the money comes from outside Nigeria. How much of it have we domesticated? So we talk about gross domestic product. These are Nigerians, and they make their money abroad. How much of it comes inside? What value is created in the domestic economy? That Dr. Omishaki is here, so that I think I'll leave to Omishaki and his team to review. But for me, Nigeria certainly needs to grow faster. You said it very correctly. I should be looking at about 7 to 8% minimum per annum, so that if the population grows at 3%, the economy is growing at 7 to 8%. So you're having headroom for between 4 to 5%. Don't forget, tertiary institutions are graduating 1 million students annually. 1 million. And you're growing and you're virtually stagnating. So where are these people going to work? And if you don't put them to work, how do you generate the income, the domestic income we're talking about? How do you generate it? We need to put people to work. and therefore the economy needs to grow. And so far that hasn't happened.
Economy needs, Dr. Mishaki, sometimes I get the impression that when you economists talk, you're talking academically, because you're giving me GDP, you're giving me this growth and that growth. But the person who's watching us this morning wants to know how what we're saying here is going to affect his life. He's earning 30,000 naira a month. He has to buy 3 tomatoes at 500 naira. How is he going to stretch that 30,000 naira to last him till the end of the month? That is more important to him than what is the GDP and what is this growth and that
oil
growth
theft
rate.
and all those.
And all that. And there are 133 million people living in this space that I'm talking about who want to know how their lives are going to improve this year.
Yeah. Unfortunately, you are right when it comes to using jargons. That's how most economists are trained. But again, the fact is exactly what we are saying is the same thing. You earn 30,000, it's still part of the GDP. Either you measure it from the consumption side or the expenditure, it's still the same idea. So there's not going to be a marked difference between the story is telling us that looks like, oh, technical something, and the average reality outside.
It doesn't look like technical. It is technical.
So every reality is technical. Go outside. I don't need to see what is outside when I receive the news that, oh, NBS has released the report GDP. I don't need to know who is suffering. I will know that somebody is outside who is suffering, even though I've not been there. So it's simple. That's how we're trained, yes. Show me the data. I know, of course, that some issues around data generation, but it's like that all over the world. But these are strong proxy that will show you what is happening outside. You can't have 3% growth rate and you tell me that people's lives are getting better or employment is increasing. Yeah. No, just ask the question, how are you growing? One, which sector is driving the growth? Two, which of these sectors driving the growth is contributing to employment generation? Three, the moment you see those 3 questions, you can easily say whether somebody outside there will sit down begging or more people will be homeless next year. It's easy for you to predict that because this is where everything comes from. Everybody works somewhere.
Now, this outlook that your organization, that the NESG has released, what are the things that can be easily taken care of? Now, it's a macroeconomic outlook, and it has certain objectives of what it is to achieve or to look out for us as a nation. So, what is the outlook about? We have just about 20 minutes for this conversation, but at the end of the day, we want to make it drill down to those who may not really understand nor have interest in the jargons. It's the impact that they're more interested in. So what are these macroeconomic issues that will drill down to the microeconomic life of people?
Okay, so what the report looks into critically is developing a framework where government can intervene in the affair of the economy, right? In a way that is also making sure that no one is left behind. We've always been saying it, but what we did was to develop a practical, implementable, clear framework. You know, most times government will say we want to lift 10 million people out of poverty, and then they will start doing something here and there. No, you can't lift people out of poverty when the economy itself is not growing, right? When people are not the main driver of the economy, the big boys in Nigeria, when they are not prospering, people on the street will not prosper. And by implication, it doesn't also matter. It doesn't also mean that when they are prospering, people will automatically be prospering, because there could be some gaps there, market failure. So don't let me be using those things now so that we don't go back to the same. So what the framework is trying to do is to say, let's build a system where from the government planning, national plan, to sectoral issues, to the ministries, every of our attention is focused on getting us better and making sure that no one is left behind.
I'll probe that for a little further with you, Mr. Shitabe. I like the fact that you spoke about a need for us to sit down and chart a direction.
Yeah.
The question for me here is, were we ever lacking in direction? I ask that because from about the time Nigeria became independent, and I've cited this countless times, I don't remember the number of national development plans we have had. And I expect that that's what this whole report is about, national development, right?
Not just that. It also looks at some points you're about to raise now as to the challenges, some of the problems we've been having in the series of national development plans.
You spoke about the fact that there needs to be a direction.
Yes.
Were we lacking direction, ab initio?
That's a pretty tricky question. Put me on the spot there.
You are on the spot already.
You know,
I ask, my apologies, maybe to help, because, I mean, citing the fact that we've been having national development plans, I assume that some of these whole, there's a machinery of government and private sector participants or practitioners that's supposed to be working towards a direction. For instance, you're talking about certain countries, you know that, okay, when you mention this country, this is what you have in mind when you mention this country. For instance, there was a time where when you're talking about machinery, you're either talking about Germany or Russia. That's the question, that's the reason I'm asking that question. Are we lacking in direction ab initio?
Yeah, let me put it in this context. Under the erstwhile military administrations, we had those 5-year rolling development plans, and there was a sense there was this sense that they were heading towards something. What it was, we didn't have a collective buy-in. I mean, it was fiat. There was really no private sector engagement and all that. And what Doctor has said is that now we will perhaps have greater private sector input into this decision-making process, and that is very critical. Because this private sector is going to be one of the key drivers of the process. So the development plans we have now are different from under the military, where it was more command and control. This is what we want to do. So all of you just fall in line.
So in terms of economic development now, is there a direction? Because, what has been, which we all can validate this, is once this government is in place, it runs this program and it gets to a particular point, another government comes in, the likelihood of that idea being jettisoned is high. It's the reason we have Ajaokuta still rolling, Ajaokuta, project stagnated since like in the 90s.
Yes.
So how do we ensure that buy-in so that we've had amazing plans over the years. So how do we ensure that this buy-in is there? Everyone who needs to jump on the bus is able to jump on the bus, and it is sustainable, irrespective of what government comes in.
Great question. And when you mentioned that Ajaokuta, I took my mind to Iwopin paper mills in Ogun State. The mill was commissioned by a late head of state who used to wear dark glasses. Not one single machine was removed from the crates. This was a project sponsored by the African Development Bank, and it's still there. And in fact, the whole concept of the J5 forest was to feed Iwopin. So what you're saying is quite correct. We just tend to start a project, commission it, and that's the end of it. And nobody follows through, which is what I said. The NESG, for instance, is now providing a framework and saying, you know what, government, you've done well. However, this is the pathway. These are the key drivers of this process. So you are now having the private sector buy and saying that let's come together to the table and look at this plan. And this is where we think you can come in. This is where the private sector can come in. So it is clear. Now, let me give you a quick example. You take a country like India, for instance. India has what we call deal counts. You go online, you see the number of decals. They tell you the projects we have, 15,000 projects. So private sector, where do you fit in? Which one are you interested in? This one can give you a return of this. This can give you a return of this. This will involve this capital expenditure. Nigeria doesn't even have a register of national assets.
But Mr. Shitabe, the same government that invites them to take part and be part of the big picture is the same government that frustrates them with multiple taxation and drives them out of business.
You know, the point you made now is a valid point, and I think it's treated actually in the NESG report. Proche has also done a report on this. He expanded on the theme of the NESG. But the truth is this: Nigeria has a revenue problem. That is the truth. We have a revenue problem. We need to grow our revenues. Now, how we grow those revenues is another conversation. Must we tax people to death? Must we tax corporates to death?
Yes.
That's the big question, right? So do we have a revenue problem? No doubt. And it's going to persist into 2023.
Yeah.
We are going to have that revenue problem. I mean, see, you're already talking about 11.3 trillion naira in deficit.
Deficit.
We're talking about, we are going to do revenues, projected revenues. And look at it here. We're doing projected revenues of 10.5 trillion, right? Now, in 2022, what did we do? Just slightly over 6 trillion. So that, and between 2022 and 2021, we just increased by 1 trillion. So how come in another 1 year, we're doing 4 times that amount? In other words, we're growing 4 trillion. How do you get to do it? How do you get to grow revenues by an additional 4 trillion? The only way to do it is either you expand your tax base or you tax people more. And then we're talking about we want to grow at 3.75%. How do you do it? So there are a lot of convoluted problems, but I think the elements of the solution are contained inside the NESG report.
Talking about the how is what a lot of people are talking about when they hear these politicians during their campaign say they're going to do this, they're going to do that. And among the things they've been campaigning about is they're going to move Nigeria from being a consumption nation to a production. Doctor, please, this is 2020.
Now you are on the spot.
Like, did I say that? Or?
No.
I just wanted to put the name of the
No, I didn't say you said that. But if we all agree that we have a revenue problem, how are we going to generate this revenue if we do not produce? Back to what I said before. Stop consuming, produce. How are we going to do that?
Yeah, I think everyone is just, we all know we have big, we all know that there's a big, the problem, the challenge is big. We easily hide under the global dimension to say, oh, global problem here and there, Russia, okay. When those things are gone, then we'll come back.
Still be in square one.
And I love, to answer that question, I love the dimension where you talked about the will to execute. Some people can say, oh, we've already been having plans, but we don't have the will or something. So that talks to the role of the state and the economy, right? Economy is not isolated. It's just like a saw. It's not, there's nothing you can do. Who determines everything? Are the people and who are there, the president, the governors, the senators, until they sit down to say, this is where we are going. All we can do is to advise, and we've been doing that for long. Imagine there is no institute, there is nobody to tell the government what to do. All these frameworks and documents are getting to the government. We are engaging them. And indeed, there are so many government positions that you will see today that as a result of this initial engagement. So if we leave them without any advice, probably will not be here. That's by the way. Secondly, yes, our problem, I won't say is entirely we should be producing. You know, you see countries who are, yes, they produce, but it's not the concept of let's produce what we eat, and then I don't even know how they put those things. It's not, the problem is bigger than that. This is the global world. You can't produce everything that you eat. You will import. But the question then is, what are you importing? And what are you producing? Question one. The second question is, what is the quality of what you are producing in the eyes of the global participants? You can keep producing yams here, and it's so common, but you can't export them. And they will waste off. You can't, for today, we can't even export most of our non-oil products in the Europe. We can't. They will waste. And that's our problem. So the problem sometimes is not that we don't produce enough. The problem is that we are producing bad things. We are not producing well. Okay. And so that's not just about looking at it from the import and the export.
It comes to the question that I was going to ask you.
we're producing bad products.
But no, I mean, you are aware that some of those products are returned back to Nigeria.
Yeah, yams inclusive,
it speaks
pineapples.
to the question that I wanted to ask you when you began to talk about the states, being responsible for these things. I describe government as a vehicle, and it has an engine. Most of the time, when people see your car, no one sees the engine. We don't even care what kind of engine it is. It's a fine car, period.
Yeah.
We see the headlamps. Sometimes we see the driver, but we can see the vehicle. We know the vehicle is moving. It has tires, it has parts we can see.
Yeah.
But it has so many other parts we can't see.
Yeah.
For instance, when the cooling system is cooling, we don't know where
how the
whole thing goes. The thermal, whatever it is that's making it, we don't know, we don't see it, but the AC cools. So speak to this engine of government. Last week, we recalled what Mr. Akabweze said, that the federal government of Nigeria has 943 or so ministries, departments, and agencies.
They've added one more since then.
Oh.
This week.
In addition to 514 or so corporations, more than 1,000 ministries, departments, and agencies of the federal government of Nigeria. Outside that's the engine.
Yeah.
In what way do you think this outlook can help this hegemony of government work? Because one of the challenges that even the president has mentioned is each of these engine parts working in silos, not working together.
Yeah, you have it's an ongoing conversation. It's been there for long. I think there was even a report some years ago about streamlining the ministries, developments, and so many of that. Yeah, but I think now the latest information is that it's not going to be taken. That report is not going to be taken. And we'll keep having these ministries here and there. In the report, we talked directly to the role of institutions. So in this case, we can see government in bringing on what these are theory, GDP.
Perhaps that's the challenge. Once we mention government, it's so generic, we don't know who it is.
Yes, exactly.
So it's lost.
Yeah, that's why I said institution. So from the ministries to the common agency here, everybody, not just the presidents now, kind of. So we talked about the role of institution in encouraging private sector participation in driving growth.
What are the propositions? Perhaps they should take this as a starter and then go and look for the reports.
So let me give an instance. An institution who is in charge of trade facilitation is meant by that name to encourage trade, to make sure that trade is done efficiently. But when you have such an institution who is also serving as a revenue-generating institution, as a trader, then you know something is wrong. That has nothing to do with private sector or people on the street or even the president, as it were. But this is just basic efficiency. Let there be trade. Remove what hinders people on the road. Let them flow. But now you are saying, oh, you give me this, you give me that. And that's not just about a bigger trade. It's even a common trade everywhere here. Imagine you want to transport yam from Osun State to Lagos. You know how long it's going to take. I'm not talking about how long the journey will take in terms of the distance. I'm saying in terms of the money you will pay. That is institution. It has nothing to do with any other. If we remove that alone, it will have serious impact, significant impact on our GDP. It will lower our inflation. All these major headlines that affect the common people are even brought about by our own inefficiency, not by what we don't have. Actually, but what we are mismanaging. So those are part of the framework, and that's central institutional change in fast-tracking reforms, that will help the private sector.
Mr. Shitabe, speaking to what he just mentioned now, I saw a video, I don't know if you guys saw it, of
a truck.
Sorry?
Polish truck.
You saw the video?
Yes.
Please speak to it. I mean, the guy, he was showing ticket upon ticket, must have been about 30 or 50.
Yeah.
One trip.
Yeah, 70 actually.
Yes, 70.
Yeah.
It was 70.
Yeah.
70 tickets. Okay, now...
And that's across federal, state, and local governments.
Yeah.
one vehicle moving yam from Iloko or wherever that
our
village
yams,
is.
not imported yam.
Not imported yam. To central Nigeria, not to the ports.
Imported yam.
And I'm happy you're talking about the yam thing. Now, the thing about this yam, and it's instructive. Nigeria is the largest producer of yam in the world. Shouldn't it be the largest exporter of yam?
No.
It should be the largest exporter.
Well, we should be, but we're not.
But we're not. Ghana is.
Yes.
So what happened? Can Ghana produce that quantity? No. It means that Ghana is taking the yam from Nigeria, taking it to Ghana, processing it into pellets, chips, and all that, and exporting. So what's the problem? What's the gap between production and export? Why can we produce so much and we can't export it? Doctor will talk about that. But that's one of the key problems.
It's the same thing we're talking about production. We need to produce.
Yes. No, but I'm saying...
Well, not produce...
not produce more, but manage what
that's the point I'm making. It's not so much that we're not producing. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of wastage.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, 30 to 40% of our farm produce are wasted.
Tomatoes,
onions, all kinds of things. So it's not that we're not producing, we are producing. But are we managing the production process with an export mind? So that we're saying, okay, we produce these things at this quality and this standard, and we'll export them. And don't get me started on the ports. That's a whole new conversation on its own. So coming back to the question you talked about, the World Bank says Nigeria's, that terrible metrics, GDP. Now, tax to GDP is 7%. And quite honestly, when I see those data, I laugh. Tax to GDP is 7%. It's not correct. And the reason why it's not correct is that they're unreported taxes and levies. And that comes to what you're talking about. I need to move things across the country. And at every single, from here to Benin, maybe about 100 stops.
Oh, gee.
And at everything, you can imagine.
Pause. We're in Lagos.
Yes.
And to get to Benin, which how many states now? About 3 or 4 states?
4 states, yes.
100 stops.
Yes.
Each one of them paying.
Yes. Those are unofficial toll gates, right? These are unofficial toll gates. So the person who's transporting is certainly looking at the fact that I have to make a return. I can't just go pick these commodities and go and sell somewhere without covering those costs. So domestic cost push inflation, horrible expression. Sorry.
One tuber of yam.
You suddenly see. Yeah, it's something that you almost pick up for free where it's produced. But by the time it comes to the city, you can see the escalation. Yeah. And so food inflation is 23%.
Yeah.
And this is why, as Doctor has rightly pointed out, we've got to find a way of unblocking our roads. First, make the roads motorable so that you have good quality roads. Secondly, let's remove all these toll gates because really and truly they constitute an effective tax on consumers and those who are providing the logistics.
In parentheses, many of them are illegal.
Oh, certainly.
But doesn't that also speak to the government working in silos that we mentioned earlier? Because there are federal government, that video showed federal government taxes or levies, state government levies, and local government levies across each of the states that they're going to have to cross. So isn't there a way of finding how these levels of government can work together to ensure, for the good of Nigeria, that it goes back to the question of direction that we mentioned earlier? Isn't there a way?
Let me quickly dial back to an administration in Lagos. And one of the things the administration did was that it set out all these plans and said, you know what, to be able to achieve these plans, I'm going to break these things into a diary of projects. So you had 100 days in office. I won't mention the governor. So it's 100 days in office, 200 days in office, 300 days in office, right up until he left office. So what it means is that performance was measurable. If there was a stumbling block to a project in the first 100 days, you're saying, hey, come to think about what's the problem here? And then you start having a conversation with other authorities. Look, I need to achieve this objective. So could you do this? Okay, let's do a bit of horse trading. I'll make this concession, but let me achieve this. The project planning and management process in Nigeria is horrific at public sector level. And so you don't, like you rightly pointed out, We don't see the necessary level of coordination because Nigeria is actually a federation. Each of these units of government are sovereign. The state is... Yeah.
Or expectedly so.
Oh, expectedly so. I like the qualification. Yeah, so that's the thing. So there should be conversations between the different levels of government. So I can charge one tax. And in that tax, I look at, okay, this is federal, this is state, and this is local. So there's no need for this
disburse.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's a central body that says, okay, this is what we pulled into general pool. You, this is your own. You, this is your own. And the formulas are agreed and we're done.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Dr. Mishakin, lastly, because we're out of time already, in operationalizing these things, how significant is, what is and how significant is the role of the private sector in this? And do they have to wait for government to take any action?
So the role of private sector is very significant, not just in this case, but all over the world. And indeed, when we look at what we call the private sector, it's more or less like everyone except the government. So it's not just about the bankers, it's not just about those big, but everyone, private entity.
Including one-man business.
Yes, including everyone, including every citizen except the government. So you can see why it's all about, it's in our hands. So it's not just about Dangotes of this world, right? Very significant. And how this can be done to link it to the very important question you raised in terms of the role of the non-state, he raised a very critical point when it comes to revenue generation. So you see governments all over the world who are doing fine in terms of the efficiency of collection. So there are two things. How much people are paying is different from how much the government is collecting. In countries that are making sure that their institutions are efficient, right? Just like we've said now, what they do is to minimize the gap, and that is called the efficiency of tax, in this case, collection. So when they collect tax, it's more or less what you pay. So everybody's fine. So if you go by that, you will not say Nigeria has 7%. But just on the point you said, maybe we'll be talking about 30%, and you will be happy. But you are paying to the government. You are also paying to the other private entity called non-state actors. They are in Lagos. They are everywhere. And that is why you couldn't see any integration between governments layer, because they are part of the system. They collect this money. So the only thing the private sector could do in this case is to keep being there, right? There is little they can do in terms of determining the path of growth. It's the role of the government. It's the signal the government gives that determines what the private sector will do. If the government wants them to flourish, they will. And if it doesn't want them to flourish, they will go out. Then you see people going out with their...
Government's body language.
If government wants the private sector to prosper, it will prosper.
It will prosper.
Yes.
If government does not want the private sector to prosper, the private sector will not prosper.
Yeah.
Okay, you have given us a manual for the engine. Let's just hope that the managers of the engine or the mechanics working on the engine of Nigeria's economy will take heed to these things. Thank you very much for being here this morning. Dr. Olusegun Omishakin is Head of Research and Chief Economist of the NESG, as well as Teslim Shitabe, who is Chief Economist and Managing Editor, ProShare Nigeria Limited. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
We're back after now to talk about something that is already building up. Please stay with us.